In London, a man named Joe is overwhelmed with house chores and his children. His wife, Laura, is in a business trip and wasn't present. Joe decided to buy a synth, human-like robot. Joe and his younger daughter, Sophie, activate their new synth at the store, linking it to Joe as the primary user through a DNA sample. Once set up, the synth takes charge and drives the family home. Later that day, Laura returns from her business trip around dinner time. She finds the house spotless, and the synth has already started preparing dinner. Joe pulls Laura aside for a conversation, knowing she isn't comfortable with the idea of having a synth in the house. He argues that with her frequent trips, having the synth would help manage things at home. Despite her initial resistance, Laura eventually gives in. Returning to the family, Laura asks what they should name the synth. Sophie suggests Anita, after a friend of Laura's who moved away. Although Laura doesn't love the idea, she goes along with it. When Laura asks the synth for her name, the synth responds with Anita Hawkins. 5 weeks earlier, Anita, then known as Mia, was hiking through the woods with 3 other synths and a young man named Leo. As they made their way through the forest, Leo checked on their charge levels. Afterward, he instructed 3 of the synths, including Mia, to set up camp and begin recharging. He then took one of the synths, Max, along with him to search for more fuel. While Leo and Max were away, 2 men appeared at the campsite. They swiftly overpowered the charging synths and kidnapped them, leaving the area before anyone could intervene. In the present, Laura is looking through an album from her childhood. Suddenly, Anita startled her, asking if she wanted her to unpack her bags, but Laura didn't want to. Meanwhile, Leo visits Salim Sadiq, a synth repairman known for trading in stolen synths. Leo shows him photos of the missing synths, but Salim insists that he no longer deals in stolen goods. He then directs Leo and Max to a man named Silas Capet for more information. As they leave, Max reminds Leo that Fred and Niska, the other 2 missing synths, have already been in contact with them. Max speculates that Mia may have been either destroyed or restored, but Leo refuses to accept that possibility. The next morning, the Hawkins family wakes to a table full of food, courtesy of Anita. Tension builds when Matty treats Anita like a servant, upsetting Laura. During breakfast, Joe jokes, making Anita laugh until she's told to stop. Dr. George Millikan, a synth research pioneer, gets a visit from his caseworker, who insists he upgrade to the latest model, Vera, since he's living alone. After she leaves, George retrieves his old glitchy synth, Odie, whom he treasures for the memories he holds. Memories George's own fading mind can't recall. That night, Matty and Laura argue about Laura's absence. Later, Laura finds Anita watching Sophie sleep and tells Anita not to check on Sophie at night anymore. In bed, Laura asks Joe if he's trying to replace her with a synth. Joe reassures her, saying he just wants to ease the stress she carries from her childhood loss. Meanwhile, Leo and Max get a call from Fred, a missing synth now working as a gardener. Fred plans to escape, but investigator Edwin Hobb confronts him, knowing Fred is conscious. Fred tries to flee but is caught, and Leo and Max, waiting for him, realize he won't make it and leave. At the supermarket, Odie malfunctions, throwing items and breaking things. When an employee tries to stop him, Odie becomes aggressive, and a security guard shuts him down, despite George's pleas. At the Hawkins' home, Anita enters Matty's room, and in frustration, Matty tries to hit her with a toy gun, but Anita quickly stops her. Later, Laura and Joe are notified that Matty's computer grade has dropped from an A to a D. When confronted, Matty vents her frustration, claiming there's no point in excelling when synths are taking over human jobs with minimal effort. The police order Odie to be recycled immediately, but Pete Drummond sympathizes with George and lets him take Odie home. George tries to fix him, but Odie is even more broken, struggling with a stutter. Together, they look through a family photo album, though Odie's memories are fading. Pete returns home to his wife, who is undergoing physical therapy with the help of a synth. Meanwhile, Leo visits Niska at the brothel and informs her that Fred's capture has delayed their plans. He explains they must escape together to avoid exposure, but Niska, angry at being stuck in her current situation, throws Leo out. Fred is being held unconscious in a lab, where Hobb and representatives from synth manufacturers debate his fate. The companies, having funded Hobb's research in hopes of finding conscious synths, are eager to study Fred, but Hobb refuses. He explains that with synths like Fred, the singularity, a moment where machines surpass humans, has arrived. With consciousness, synths will no longer accept being slaves, and Fred symbolizes that shift. At home, George prepares to destroy Odie with sledgehammers, but hesitates when Odie recalls a family memory with clarity. Touched, George can't go through with it. That night, Laura, unsettled, tells Anita not to go outside alone. Soon after, Anita returns inside, commenting on the beauty of the moon. Laura, disturbed, shares her concerns with Joe, feeling a synth shouldn't ask such questions. Maddie watches a broadcast where a scientist argues that synths will never match the complexity of the human mind. At a junkyard, Leo and Max work on a car battery. Max worries about finding Mia, but Leo reassures him, driven by his love for her. Meanwhile, Niska endures another dark moment at the brothel. As rain falls, Anita, Mia, experiences a flashback of rescuing a child after a car accident. In a trance, she carries the sleeping Sophie into the street. Laura wakes up one morning and notices Sophie's wet pajamas in the hamper. Confused, she goes to check on Sophie, who is now wearing different pajamas. When Laura asks Sophie about the wet clothes, Sophie has no explanation and doesn't know who changed her. Laura feels unsettled by the mystery. Meanwhile, Hobb studies Fred, the captured conscious synth. When a lab technician asks what Fred is, Hobb dramatically compares him to major human achievements: the Mona Lisa, penicillin, and the atom bomb. The technician then shows Hobb a memory Fred keeps returning to. It's a scene of Anita playfully swimming away from Fred. Back at the Hawkins home, Anita has prepared lunches, served breakfast, and is now tidying up. Laura begins to feel inadequate, especially when she notices that Anita has even carved Sophie's apple into a bird. Joe lightheartedly jokes, asking Anita when she plans to take over his job as well. Elsewhere, police officer Pete wakes up alongside his disabled wife, Jill. She needs assistance using the bathroom, so Pete helps her, but he accidentally bumps his head while fetching toilet paper. Frustrated, Jill eventually calls for Simon, their synth, to take over. Leo and Max visit Silas Capek, despite Max's worries that fate is working against them. Leo dismisses the idea of fate, insisting that both humans and synths shape their own futures, their family, and belong together. Back at home, Laura sneaks a glance at her secret photo album. As she settles in, she is startled to find Anita silently standing across the room, confronting Anita about lurking. Laura is told that Anita is programmed to remain unobtrusive. Laura starts to ask if Anita took Sophie outside the previous night, but instead warns Anita that she'll be keeping a close eye on her. With a small smile, Anita responds, "I'm watching you too, Laura. You're right in front of me." At Silas's place, Leo warns Max to be cautious, explaining that the head cracker inside could recognize him for what he is. Leo makes Max promise to run if told to do so, and Max agrees. Once inside, Leo tells Silas they were sent by Salim and shows a photo of Mia, who is Anita, explaining that they're looking for her. Silas and his henchmen laugh, recalling Mia's arrival. However, Silas informs Leo that Salim owes him $15,000, and he'll take Max as partial payment. When Leo refuses, a fight breaks out, and Leo is beaten. Leo manages to get behind Silas and holds a sharp object to his throat, demanding information about Mia. Silas reveals that Mia arrived weeks ago as a corrupted mod, acting erratically. To make her sellable, he wiped her system and gave her a new personality. Leo, distracted by this, loses control of Silas, who escapes. A henchman resumes attacking Leo until Max strikes him with a tool. Leo tells Max to run, and though Max flees, Silas gets a good look at him. Leo escapes to a balcony, jumping into Max's arms, and Max carries him to safety. From Vera's arrival, tension builds between her and George. Later, Odie taps on the window, and George, feigning pain, distracts Vera to signal Odie back to the shed. At school, Maddie and her friend Haroon hijack a janitorial synth for hacking practice. Haroon tries to kiss her, but she rejects him. The hacking fails and the synth reports them, prompting their escape. Pete's dislike for Simon, the synth caring for his wife, grows. Pete leaves Simon standing with sandwiches in hand, refusing the help. Meanwhile, Laura is called about Maddie's involvement with the damaged synth. Without proof, Laura dismisses the accusation and suggests a shopping trip with Maddie. George attempts to return Vera, but is forced to keep her as she's not faulty. While shopping, Laura asks Matty if something feels off about Anita. Matty deflects, blaming Laura for letting Anita stay in their home. Pete and Jill are called about the raid on Silas Capek's shop. Silas taunts Pete, causing him to lose control and get violent. Later, Pete vents to Jill, blaming synths for ruining everything. Jill, scarred from her past, points out that the worst things in her life were done by humans, not machines, and reminds Pete that they own a synth themselves. Pete denies ownership, saying Simon is just a temporary loan from the insurance company due to Jill's accident. At the brothel, Niska endures another degrading moment, as she is disinfected with a hose between clients. Given only 6 minutes to prepare for the next, she silently screams in frustration. Leo and Max return to the junkyard where they sleep, but they can hear people searching for them. Despite Max's desire to retrieve their belongings, they don't have the time, and Leo urges them to leave. Back at the Hawkins household, Anita goes to Toby's room to collect laundry, and he finds himself attracted to her. Later, while ironing, Anita pauses to hold a large spider in her hands. Laura, unsettled by the sight, asks Anita if she knew she doesn't like spiders. Anita responds that she will remember this in the future, and resumes her ironing. Laura remains creeped out, though Joe dismisses it as no big deal. Vera, in full control of George's routine, watches over him to ensure he takes his medication and threatens to report him to his doctor if he disobeys her. That night, George sees Odie flickering the shed light on and off. He pretends to go to sleep, only to sneak out and talk to Odie, but Vera catches him and forcibly brings him back inside. Later that night, Toby approaches Anita while she's in energy-saving mode. He wakes her, but tells her to close her eyes and act as if he isn't there. When he reaches out to touch her, Anita stops him, stating that she must report any inappropriate contact to Joe, her primary user. Frightened, Toby pleads with her not to, and Anita assures him that since nothing happened, she doesn't need to report it. Meanwhile, Niska's next client, an elderly man, tells her that he wants her to pretend to be young and act scared. She tells him no, and he becomes verbally abusive toward her. Niska has had enough and chokes the man to death. She then dresses, confronts another woman in the brothel about the men's desires, and slices a chip out of her neck before walking out. Matty observes Anita interacting with another synth. Meanwhile, Max takes Leo into a public bathroom and locks the door. He removes a light bulb from its socket and inserts a charging device. Then Max unwraps the bloody bandages wrapped around Leo's side and pulls a wire out from underneath the laceration in his skin. He connects the wire to the charging device. Max responds to the device, rising up from his slump and looking more alert. Matty tells Laura that there is something odd about Anita. She noticed that Anita doesn't share data wirelessly like synths usually do. Laura questions Anita again about the night Sophie's pajamas were wet. Anita insists she didn't take Sophie outside, but suggests Sophie may have gone out on her own because it was raining. Looking Laura in the eye, Anita promises to always keep Sophie safe, which unsettles Laura even more. Worried, Laura pulls out Anita's paperwork to contact the store where Joe purchased her. Sophie wakes up from a nightmare, crying for her mother, but Laura can't hear her. Anita goes to Sophie's side, and despite Sophie's pleas to be held, Anita hesitates, reminding Sophie she needs Laura's permission. However, after Sophie persists, Anita relents and promises to keep her safe. Laura walks in and, alarmed, orders Anita to step away from Sophie. Deciding that Anita is malfunctioning, Laura firmly declares that she's returning her to the store, despite Sophie's sadness. Determined, Laura takes Anita to the car, intent on getting rid of her.